Erev Tov. Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon to those watching in North America. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you in person or virtually to another of our English events. We've been running these for several years now, and particularly since October 7th, 2023, we've been running events which are very pertinent to what we are all, as Israelis and as Jews, experiencing both here in Israel and around the world. And that's very much relevant for tonight's event and tonight's book that we are launching here. I should say, phones off. Quick reminder. If anyone has a pager, leave it outside. I hear there's a problem with those. We invited President Yitzhak Herzog. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it, although I did get a very nice message from his office in which they insisted that I read his praise for the book, which is here in the book. So I'm going to read that now. So I've done my duty by the president. So there's a number of very nice testimonials at the beginning of the book. President Herzog says, having spent my high school years in New York some decades ago, I enjoyed diving into Professor Gil Troy's inspiring, relevant Zionist vision, rooted in American values and Jewish moral codes, Jewish history, and contemporary Israeli life. With these timely, must-read letters to his students and to us all, Gil Troy confirms his stature as a revered teacher, a leading public intellectual, and one of today's influential Zionist thinkers. So I obviously concur with all of that, and we have had the pleasure of launching many of Gil Troy's books here at the Begin Center. The first book of Gil's that I read was Why I'm a Zionist, from I think maybe 10 years ago or something like that. More than that? Okay. We're both getting on, fine. But one of the things that struck me, and I want to bring in just briefly here before I hand over to our other speakers, the relevance that we're holding this here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. So one of the things that was, I think, so central to Menachem Begin's legacy was how unapologetic a Jew and a Zionist he was. Unapologetic about being a proud Jew, zero tolerance attitude to anti-Semitism and to threats to Israel's security, and we all know about the implications that that had for policy in terms of his support for Soviet Jewry, his insistence on rescuing Ethiopian Jews, his ordering the attack on Saddam Hussein's reactor. And Gil, I want to really applaud your Jewish and Zionist pride. And I remember when I read Why I'm a Zionist, it was, already then, I mean, we didn't know what was coming, but already then, Zionism had become a dirty word in progressive circles, and I thought that it was such an important message to send, and that pride has run through several of your books, including Never Alone, which you co-wrote with I saw him here earlier, I think he's here in the audience, Nathan Sharansky, that epitome of never say die Jewish pride. And this book as well, To Resist the Academic Intifada, letters to my students on defending the Zionist dream, I think is also in that same vein, defending not just Israel's right to exist, and exposing the lies and defamation behind all those accusations that we've heard so often, apartheid, genocide, fill in the demonizing term, but also about defending the justice of Zionism, and Zionism as a liberal idea, about liberating a people. And Begin, I think, would also appreciate that line that you draw, connecting Zionism and Americanism and liberal democracy. He was a great admirer of America and the idea of America, a republic founded not just on Enlightenment ideas, but also on Judeo-Christian tradition. And he was probably Israel's most passionate defender of liberal ideas, like freedom of speech and minority rights, the rule of law, checks and balances in government. So I want to make that connection between the Begin Center and this book. It's not incidental. We're also very proud to be partnering for this event with the the Jewish People Policy Institute. And I'm going to hand over now to Professor Yedidia Stern, who's the president of the Jewish People Policy Institute, also a professor at the Faculty of Law at Bar-Ilan University. He previously served as Dean of Bar-Ilan University's Faculty of Law and was a senior fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute. For a decade, he was the Institute's vice president for research. He's lectured and been a visiting scholar at many universities abroad, including Harvard, Columbia, Brandeis, Princeton. He's served on multiple boards. He has one of those very long bios, which makes us all feel horribly inadequate. So I'm not going to read it all, but you don't have to trust me. We'll look it up. Professor Stern is someone that I personally have learned a lot from reading him over the years. He's frequently interviewed by Israeli international media on issues of law and society, religion, state, Judaism and democracy, Jewish identity and Israeli culture, and I'm very pleased to have him with us this evening.
Good evening. Welcome everybody. 37 years ago, I was a student at Harvard. Till a year and a half ago, I was a proud student at Harvard. I want to tell you what Harvard was for me then, and how sorry I am that it might not be the same for current Jewish young students. First of all, I met my wife at Harvard, which was a big deal, obviously, for both of us. And it was a place that allowed it to happen. Hillel was a flourishing place. The campus was very Jewish. By the way, 5 of the law professors at Harvard University served in the IDF, believe it or not. I don't know how many of them served in the American Army. It's another issue. But it was a very warm place for an Israeli like myself, you know, from Petah Tikva to Harvard. And I felt at home. It took a while, but I felt at home. My dear wife decided to build a sukkah at Harvard Yard. And this became an event. Everybody came. What is this? What for? Why do you celebrate Sukkot? What it means to you, etc., etc. I even remember, believe it or not, that the guest of honor at graduation, my graduation at Harvard, was nobody else but Teddy Kollek, the mayor of United Jerusalem, East and West Jerusalem. And the Harvard administration invited Teddy Kollek to be, you know, there's one major guest of honor, and this was Teddy Kollek. And I can go on and on, but this is past. What is present? So, you see, academic intifada. This is, I think, quite an accurate definition of the very vicious eruption of hate towards Israel, Zionism, sometimes also Jews, and even Western civilization. And this is what is going on. I collected some facts for you. So here's some facts. 73% of Jewish college students have experienced or witnessed some form of anti-Semitism since the beginning of the war. 3/4. The percentage of Jewish students who say they feel comfortable with others on campus knowing they are Jewish dropped by nearly half in the last year. More than 1/3 of Jewish students say they feel uncomfortable speaking about their views of Israel, and on and on and on. Obviously, it's not a toxic environment, we shouldn't exaggerate, but you feel uncomfortable. In order to balance it, I must say that about 2/3 of non-Jewish students at American colleges apparently did not display any hostility towards Jews or Israel in the last year, 2/3. So we have to see the big picture. 15% of them, of the non-Jewish students, were extremely hostile toward Israel, but did not express explicitly negative views about Jews. Another 15% of non-Jewish students endorsed at least one explicitly anti-Jewish belief. So let's give you the rough picture of what's going on. Two-thirds are not involved. The other third is really problematic from our point of view. So Gil, my friend, he keeps the Begin very busy with his books. Gil tries to teach students in America not how to resist, but why to resist, which is much more important than how. And he basically tells them and us, all of us, that too many dear things are so important to protect, and that's why you have to resist. To quote him one sentence, that's all. Gil says, America and Israel, Zionism and liberalism are worth defending. That's basically the main theme of the book as I understand it. So first of all, thank you, Gil, for this. Thank you for all the work you're doing for the Jewish people, for JVPI. As a senior fellow, we are very proud that you're with us. And I'm sure that we'll hear tonight some kind of a recipe of understanding what needs to be done, not how, but what in a general sense, in order to protect our civilization, our Zionism, the Jewish state, and our Jewishness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Edith Stern. Okay, before we get to our panel discussion, I'm going to invite the author of this book, Professor Gil Troy, Senior Fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute and a Distinguished Scholar in North American History at McGill University. He's the author, as we've seen, of To Resist the Academic Intifada, Letter to My Students on Defending the Zionist Dream. He also published The Essential Guide to October 7th and its aftermath, Facts, Figures and History, which has been translated into French and widely reprinted. Both are on sale outside, as you'll have seen, you'll see afterwards. He's also the editor of the 3-volume set Theodore Herzl's Zionist Writings, and the author of several acclaimed books on Zionism and American politics, including The Zionist Ideas, Visions for the Jewish Homeland, Then, Now, Tomorrow, and The Age of Clinton, America in the 1990s. He's been interviewed on most major North American TV and radio networks, published essays in the American, Canadian, Israeli media. He has a weekly column for the Jerusalem Post, and his recent articles have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, The Hill, The Jewish Journal, and many other publications. Professor Gil Troy.
Thank you, Paul. It's a real honor to be here and to be with my family, my particular formal family, my growing family, and my extended family. And thinking of family, and thinking of my grandfather, who never missed the opportunity to celebrate how lucky we are to be in freedom, how lucky we are to be in prosperity, how lucky we are to be in this moment. I'm going to start by saying, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Haolam, shechianu, kiyamanu, v'higeyanu l'zman hazeh. I keep on giving students a time machine with all the despair around. And I say, pick a period in American history. Pick a period in Jewish history. Pick a period in Israeli history you'd rather be living in. And it's a way of clarifying that certainly we have challenges, certainly we have problems, but we are so lucky. We are so lucky to have one another. We are so lucky to have this remarkable state with all its challenges, but also with all its glories. And we're so lucky to be indeed, as Yedidia was saying, to be at this intersection of Americanism and Zionism and liberalism. And that's why throughout this whole period, this whole dark past year and a half, I refuse to despair. And I say we still remain the people of hope. And I look at myself, I wake up every morning in the mirror and Modernity is such a beautiful prayer. I don't say it as often as I should, but it's an amazing prayer. We are so blessed, and I am so blessed. I'm blessed to be a part of this amazing conversation also. This search for meaning, and this attempt to speak to the next generation. And what we wanted to do tonight is not just hear me and amazing experts, but actually see if these ideas that I'm articulating, that so many of you are on the front lines articulating, actually generate other ideas, generate inspiration, and resonate with the next generation. And so that's why we'll be doing this youth panel very soon. And Paul, I want to thank you because you've not only been kind enough to launch the various books of mine, but you've created this as an important center for conversation. And if everybody looks to the front, they'll see that that the front is kind of a little bit like the Knesset, because this Begin Center is in the process of having a youth congress. And it was too complicated to undo what they've done, but it's part of the power of this place. It's not just a museum. When we say museums, we think of something that's past. We think of something that's old. We think of something antique. But this is a living, breathing institution, and you've brought so much life to it, so I want to thank you. And as I mentioned before, each time when I come to the Begin Center, and I think that so much of our Zionist journey as a Troy family was shaped by my father, Zichrono Livracha, Dov Troy, who in 1943, when he was 13 years old, living on the Lower East Side. And think about it, he's living like so many of us in two realities. Living in American history, and by 1943, things are turning. By 1943, America's on the march. By 1943, New York is prospering. By 1943, the Great Depression that he was born into, that he lived every day of his life, is changing. His father, my grandfather, Alav Shalom Tevye Troyansky, has his first steady job in the Brooklyn shipyards, which hired 40 to 50,000 people to create these amazing ships that ultimately won World War II. And while he's living that reality, whispers of Holocaust, although we didn't have that word yet, of tragedy, of weakness, are reaching his ears. And so living that dual reality, how does he manage it? And in 1943, he's tutoring a young man named Marvin Krakow, part of the broader Krakow clan and also related to Moshe Ahrens. And he hears about this thing called Beitar. He hears about a Zionist youth movement, which says indeed of unapologetic Zionism, which says indeed, stand strong, stand tall, be proud. And he starts on his Zionist journey. And then in 1955, he meets my mother, who had been our own Zionist journey. And so this is part of our Yerusha, this is part of our heritage, that unapologetic Zionism. And for me now to be a part of the JPPI, the Jewish People Policy Institute, which I call the global think tank for the Jewish people, we're so good at being reactive. We're so good at worrying. We're so good at figuring out yesterday's problems. And what Yedidya's doing with his amazing team is thinking about tomorrow. Think about what problems do we have to anticipate, and how do we create a positive Zionist response, a positive Jewish response. And the last year and a half I've been part of this amazing adventure. Every Tuesday when I come to a staff meeting and I hear the amazing things going on, and every Tuesday when it seems like you've added more people to the most powerful law firm in Israel because you're working on the Chukar Azad, the thin constitution, I feel lucky to be a part of this broader conversation. And I also feel so blessed, so very blessed by my amazing family. By Linda, who has been such an inspiration and such a support and has been the true Zionist of the family. I write the books, but she's created the Zionist reality here in Israel, Jerusalem. And, it's not easy being married not just to a Queen's boy with our emotionally stunted growth, but a writer, and you have to be kind of the book widow. And this book, as you'll hear, was actually a three-part book story. And so each time it's an adventure, but each time I am ever so grateful for that amazing moment when I was just figuring out what Montreal was like, and he said, "Oh, I'll away to rent, I'll vendre, to buy." I thought there was a landlord named Elur and somebody else named Evander, and she took me on my first house hunt in Montreal, and from there we've raised 4 amazing kids who've now expanded our amazing family with 3 beautiful husbands and wives, and Machatanim. I was in New York recently, and somebody said, 3 weddings in 1 year? So you must really hate one set of in-laws. And I said, no, if we get invited to Shabbat, if we have a chance to go out to dinner with them, we're happy to go. And so we really are so very blessed. And when I was almost finished writing this book, I wanted to dedicate it to 4 couples. I wanted to dedicate it to 4 couples who, in so many ways, represent the vision of the book and represent the values of the book. To 4 couples who started as people about whom I just read, what we call bold-faced letters in the New York Post. I read their books, I read their works, and then they became mentors, and then they became friends. And it's Natan and Avital Sharansky who taught us all so much about courage and defiance. It's Blue and Yitzhak Greenberg, who added also a whole Jewish dimension to that conversation. And back in New York, when I was growing up in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, they were the king and queen of Jewish New York, the intellectual king and queen of Jewish New York. And then when I got to Montreal, I had the privilege of befriending Erwin and Ariella Kotler, who taught me so much, along with Ruth and Len Weiss, about being academic activists, about balancing academic rigor and activism. And then I started thinking about more and more people who want to add to this list of mentors, and it was getting too long. And so in the spirit of the book, I just decided to dedicate the book to you, my students, like your Israeli peers who disproved the conventional dismissal of them as the TikTok generation. So many of you have proved to be determined defenders of the American dream, the Zionist dream, true liberalism, and the pursuit of truth in all its messiness. So I wanted to hijack the podium and thank you for those 4 couples. We have at least one representative here. And to say my blessing to my kids and to every young person in the room is that I should be lucky enough to be on that journey that I was on, of meeting people in print, and then meeting them in person, and then befriending them, and realizing that their greatness wasn't in their accomplishments, wasn't in their achievements, but was in their souls and in their values. And that's been the great payoff for me about plunging into the Jewish world and plunging into the Zionist conversation. I said the book was written 3 times, because it started about 2 years ago, when I came back from my first post-COVID speaking tour. And I was stunned. I was in some of the most magnificent households I've been in, sitting with some of the most successful people in America. And they were in deep despair. Why? Because their kids were in despair. And they had caught the despair. And I said, how could it be? With all the freedom, with all the prosperity, how could it be? With all the goodies we have in our lives, how could it be that there's a spread of despair in America? How could it be that we can't talk to one another in America? And I came home and I wrote a manifesto. Cancel me, unwoke, and anti-MAGA, anti-Trump. I wanted to find that holy middle. I wanted to find that sense that said, as I learned from Mayor Ed Koch, if you agree with me on 7 of 12 things, please vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 of 12 things, please see a psychiatrist. The notion that every political leader is always perfect or perfectly evil is toxic to American democracy and Israeli democracy too. And I bashed left and I bashed right, respectfully, substantively, but trying to come up with a positive vision. And because I taught my students that it's better to show than tell, and because I kept on going back to how lucky I was, how lucky my generation was, I started writing a kind of memoir, my story, our generation's story of what I call Generation Hope. We all have the Yetziat Mitzrayim story, or a Mayflower tale, of our parents, our grandparents, great-parents coming from the old country. And by the way, I never heard of any sunshine in the old country. We never got any Polish nostalgia. All I imagined Poland and Ukraine was dark and bleak and despairing when I first went to Poland and it was sunny. I was in shock. But we came to America, the land of possibility. We came to America, the land of the dream. And as I grew into the American dream, intertwined was the Zionist dream. And intertwined was lowercase l, liberalism. But I'm not important enough to write my memoir. And I steal one of Natan's jokes that he thinks he's not old enough to write his memoirs, so I certainly am not old enough to write my memoirs. Although we're the same age because you lost 9 years in the Gulag. And I'm talking to my editor, Adam Bello, and he says, this isn't your memoir. Write letters to students. This is who you are. You're a professor. Write a series of letters to students. And I said, oh, but Yossi Klein, let me just state it. He said, oh, they've been doing it since Rilke's letters to the young poets. Don't worry. It's an accepted form. And that gave me the focus. And on October 7th, I rewrote the book again to make it more about Zionism, to make it an update to that book you kindly mentioned, Paul, Why I'm a Zionist. Because I felt that at this moment, at this difficult moment, we had to reaffirm the Zionist dream. We had to reaffirm the Zionist message. And we all remember those dark days of despair. October 7th, October 8th, October 9th. It's funny, it was actually quite sunny in Jerusalem, but my memory of it is dark and dreary, and the silence on the street. And Yoni had scrambled up north as part of that amazing miracle of the Milunikim, the reservists who stopped Hezbollah from doing unspeakable damage and unspeakable horrors. And Aviv and Ronnie had flown back from Sri Lanka, and they landed early Monday morning. And as we entered Jerusalem, just as we dropped Ronnie off at our house, Aviv told us that Ben was missing. Ben Mizrahi, this young 22-year-old from Vancouver who had come to Israel when he was 18. He wanted to be on a kind of a real raw Israel program, not kind of curated American program like I've been on. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And he met Aviv and the Chevra and became part of the family. And it was Kibben Bayit. We discovered later he was one of those kids. There were 7 families that thought of him as Kibben Bayit. And unfortunately on Tuesday, we discovered that he'd been killed at the Nova Festival. And on Wednesday, we went to his funeral. And his sister, Neve, said what I was thinking when she eulogized, this 18-year-old kid eulogizing her 22-year-old brother. She said, this should be his wedding. Everybody around here loves Ben. This is the Ben fan club. But before Neve spoke, the first eulogist told Ben's story, which is that Ben and Itai, another friend of Aviv's, had been at Nova, had a chance to run away, but instead, like so many that day, ran back toward into the fire. Ben had been a combat medic. Itai had trained into Duvan on the commander unit with Aviv, and they fought as hard as they could without weapons. And Ben broke into an ambulance, he didn't learn that in Vancouver, and put a medical backpack on his back. And that backpack is now at his memorial at Nova. And when I heard that story of that particular action, their heroism, and then it echoed with so many other acts of heroism, I flipped a switch. October 7th, 8th, 9th, we were stuck in pogrom. We were stuck in Shoah. We were stuck in weakness, in failure. So fascinating, and my most secular friends, the most secular kibbutznikim, described that day not as the worst day of Israeli history, but the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. When I heard Ben Nitai's story, I flipped back into Zionism. Yes, the Israeli government failed that day, unfortunately. Yes, the IDF failed that day temporarily. But Zionism succeeded. Zionism never promised us a rose garden. Zionism never promised us a state on Magash HaKesef, on a silver platter, as Chaim Weizmann said and that Natan Alterman wrote so beautifully. Zionism gave us the methodology and the ideology and the defiance and the character and the skills to fight back. And from that moment on, I'm back in Zionist mode. From that moment on, I'm writing about our Zionist possibilities, our Zionist opportunities. And so from October 7th on, I started rewriting the book to bring in that Zionist vision, to go back to the Zionist ideas, to go back to why I'm a Zionist, to tell the next generation how lucky we are to be carrying the chain, how lucky we are to be continuing the tradition, how lucky we are to understand that this is our moment in Israel and the United States and Canada and the UK and Australia to stand up and say you cannot push us around. And to create a Zionism which isn't anti-Semitism, which isn't anti-Zionism, but is positive and is constructive. And it's about rebuilding when the fight ends. And it's about creating a culture of responsibility in this society and throughout the Jewish world. And it's about building a healthy, balanced identity, which I call identity Zionism, which goes back to why I'm a Zionist, but also goes back to what I learned in Young Judea and what I learned at the Machon, the Madrechei Chutz La'aretz. I learned about the possibilities that we have to find inspiration when we have this amazing story. And so that was the second rewrite. And then as the year went on, indeed, as you did point it out, what I'm hearing at my academic home, McGill, at Harvard, where we felt so comfortable, where in fact there was a kind of apologetics back in those days, in the 1980s, about the anti-Semitism of the past. And a certain sense of welcome that we had. When my Harvard roommate read the first legal brief against Harvard by Shabbos Kestenbaum and others, detailing the anti-Semitism that so many Harvard students had endured, Michael Mattis cried. He cried because, A, he's empathetic, and couldn't believe what they were going through, because we never went through that. If I built my Zionism on the foundation of anti-Semitic trauma, it would be a very thin Zionism indeed. I'm part of what Leon Wiesel calls the spoiled brats of Jewish history. We're the lucky ones. But he also couldn't believe the death of this illusion. Michael couldn't believe that this institution that he had worshipped, and that we had worshipped, had turned on us. It's the triple double cross. They not only betrayed the Jews, that's an old story, unfortunately. They not only betrayed liberalism, that's a 50, 60-year-old story. They betrayed themselves. They betrayed their core values. They betrayed their core identity. Feminists silent about rape. Academics not allowing for there to be a healthy educational environment. They forgot their core mission, blinded as too many were by Jew hatred. But indeed, as you did point it out, it's not all. And we have to be balanced. It's not helpful, I keep on telling students, to go in thinking every professor is an anti-Semite, thinking that every college campus is hostile. First of all, it's bad for your soul. Secondly, it's just not true. And then we look hysterical. Come in with balance. Come in with nuance. I say, even if you're in a college class and you feel disrespected by the professor, first give that professor the benefit of the doubt. Go up to him or her. Engage them. You can always go and press the alarm bell. But first, have an I vow. The same kind of I vow that we're expecting from our professors and that we should be giving, we students should also give back. And in the third part of the book, or the third rewrite, I said we have to name this phenomenon. And we've been gaslighted. When we said, oh, we're against wokeness, they said, oh, you're part of Trump and DeSantis, because as soon as Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis attacked woke, then all of a sudden my liberal friends who've been critiquing woke said, oh, it must be okay, because the all or nothingness of modern American politics. And then we called out critical race theory, which has some very good ideas. One of the things I point out is that most bad ideas in the world start as really good ideas, but they go all accelerator, no brakes. And so we have to acknowledge the kernel of the idea, but see when it's taken too far. And if you criticize critical race theory, they say, oh, you're a racist. Like, okay, I'm not going to go that way. And then you say, well, maybe it's postmodernism and nobody knows what you're talking about. So I said, well, for the last 14 months, they've been yelling Intifada, Intifada, from the river to the sea, not knowing what river, not knowing what sea. And so let's call it out as the academic Intifada. And so yes, to resist the academic Intifada. But because it is so important that the ultimate message be positive, we call it Letters to My Students on Defending the Zionist Dream. And when I say Zionist Dream, I want you to think of American Dream. I want it to echo. Because the American Dream and the Zionist Dream rhyme much more than they clash. And this is indeed a civilizational fight to take back the night. And I'm honored because it's been very moving to see. In 2 weeks I was in the United States in preparation for a month-long trip to Canada and the US in February. People are very excited about the book. And I don't think it's because of any genius of the book, because they haven't read the book yet. It's that nobody else is talking about the ideas. We're too busy being reactive. Nobody's dreaming. And the Montreal Federation has bought 2,500 copies. The Toronto Federation has bought 2,000 copies. Various philanthropists are buying mass buys. And when I spoke to somebody in Austin, where they said they were buying 400 copies, they said part of the reason why we're doing this is because you can't get in Austin bookstores books with the word Zionist on the title. They don't announce it because then they'll get pushback. But there's a kind of chilling boycott. And so we're seeing people we're sort of bypassing the normal system to stand up and say we still need this intellectual debate. We still need this conversation. And when I was in the US, one person said, well, you know, the cover is a little strong. And by the way, my holy cousin Adele survived 11 hours in Kibbutz Nirim when she was on the Tel Aviv train, the train to Tel Aviv, with this book, and was worried that somebody might attack her for the Palestinian colors. But I assured her that we have a very tolerant society and that would never happen. But this woman said to me, you know, how can I get my kids to read this book if it's so in your face? And I say, the time for apologetics is over. They're the ones gaslighting us. We have to call them out. We have to stand strong. I want to finish by reading one piece as a way of setting up the youth panel. This also allows you to say, oh, I didn't just hear somebody rant and rave about the academic Intifada. I went to a reading today, and that's much more sophisticated. It also gets me to repeat that joke, which I do at every book launch. Liberal nationalists, constructive citizens, need a sense of purpose and leaps of hope. Hope fuels democracy. It's made America great, and its greatest leaders inspiring. There's no Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, no Franklin Roosevelt or Eleanor Roosevelt, no Martin Luther King, no Betty Friedan, without hope. The most transformational presidents in my lifetime, from John Kennedy to Ronald Reagan, wielded the sword of hope to defeat despair, which translated Zionist dreams into the best Israeli realities is Hatikva, the hope. 4 leaps of hope define my life, and I write to students and many of your parents' lives too. America's leap of hope in 1776 created a new world, realizing the biblical notion. The Greeks didn't invent democracy. It started in the Bible. Realizing the biblical notion that we are all created equal and have inherent rights, which government must protect. As an American, I've been perpetually propelled forward by the Jeffersonian slogan, oozing Lockean optimism, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That ideological trifecta built the world's first mass middle-class civilization, which raised my parents up, my grandparents up, so many of our parents and grandparents. Nearly a century later, the Zionist movement triggered a Jewish nationalist revolution and returned to the homeland, the one homeland, the indigenous homeland of the Jewish people, Israel. That leap of hope, epitomized by Theodor Herzl's founding vision of that's the problem of being an American historian and a Zionist activist. That leap of hope, epitomized by Theodor Herzl's founding vision of the formal movement established in Basel in 1897, Im Tirtzu Ein Zo Agada, if you will, it is no dream, assumed that tomorrow would be better than today, and it's our responsibility to roll up our sleeves and make it happen. Hatikva, the hope, celebrates our opportunity to be a free people in our homeland, the land of Zion, Jerusalem. And that verse epitomizes the Zionist trinity of peoplehood, homeland, and statehood. I became a Zionist thanks to my good, safe, free American life, which liberated me to pursue my happiness. America will only improve if we manage the challenge of being one free people Zionist style, with each of us expressing ourselves individually and enjoying our particular subculture within the broader national framework. We need a new rebalancing. Of course we need to have identity pride, but not identity politics. The third leap of hope, actually 4 leaps, involved my 4 grandparents leaving the old world, Eastern Europe's poverty and oppressions, to give us, their descendants, unimagined New World freedoms. We were blessed to live long and prosper, in the words immortalized by Leonard Nimoy, the Jewish actor who played Mr. Spock, and introduced the Jews' priestly hand gesture to millions in Star Trek, the original series, showing how deeply Jewish so much culture that we grew up with was, and we didn't realize it. And finally, the 4th leap of hope, or series of leaps, encompasses the values, the skills, the aspirations, the lucky breaks that propelled my 2 brothers and me from lower middle class Queens into educations and careers defined by some of the world's most prestigious institutions, which for me meant Harvard and McGill, and now JPPI and Merkaz Begin. I embraced Harvard's motto, Veritas, which means Latin for truth. People convinced they know the truth. Hey Hayidiyah, terrify me. Life is too messy. But truth-seeking, accepting complexity, is what academia should specialize in and what life is all about. This vision fuses my father's bookish rationalism with my mother's logic. Be a mensch, meaning don't just be kind and good, but have integrity, seeking truths and truth to live your truths. And so with these 4 leaps of hope in mind, I want to invite our amazing youth panel. We have May Brown, who served as a shlichah in Seattle during this past difficult year, and now is the head of Television University Hill. We have Nora Rosenfeld, who just landed just a few hours ago and is a student at Northwestern, was at Purdue last year. And we have my son, Aviv Troy, who's been looking for a Middle an American Israeli who had served with Battlestat, and also he spent a few months with Roni, and he teaches during Benaya and others on Be'eri. And we thought that balance of fighting and rebuilding is exactly the kind of Zionist balance we're seeking. So welcome to the panel. Let's start with you, May. Tell us a little bit about where you were on October 7th and what you experienced, endured, and maybe give us a sense of how it changed you.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me today, and thank you everyone for coming. As mentioned, I was a community shlicha, which means emissary, with my husband in Seattle, Washington. We arrived there at the end of August, and I had very little time before October 7th. It was Friday for us. The 10-hour differences was a big deal during that time. We just left actually Friday for dinner because it was still Friday night. And I started getting all these messages saying something is going on, there are rockets, missiles. And I clearly remember thinking, okay, here we go again. Same old, been there, done that, another operation, no biggie. We went back home, we went to sleep, we woke up, I don't know, a while later with the time differences, and we woke up to a completely different reality. And to be honest, I think it took me a good few days or even a week to fully understand the amount of chaos going on. Though the internet and I was plugged into the news, it was still very hard for me to believe what's going on. It was really a day that our life changed, and my shlichut changed as well.
How did it change?
So I was supposed to work with youth and to bring more teenagers to Israel for immersive experiences, which obviously was tossed outside the window at that moment. At first I got a lot of attention, and the community really wanted me to speak. I spoke to a lot of electives. I spoke to Patty Murray. I actually made her cry with my stories. I'm very proud of that. I raised money. I talked everywhere, whoever wanted to hear, and I was very busy. But actually, as time passed by and the idea of starting to have the upper hand at war and operate the war, the Jewish community started to drift away from siding with Israel. And as time passes by, I had less and less work. And it really got to a place that I had very little work, and many Jewish organizations in Seattle actually didn't want to have me talking to their teens, talking to their young adults, because I was the representative of Israel, and that was actually being said.
So in the 10, 12 months you were there, you experienced this kind of surge of interest and then a distancing.
Yeah.
And how did people explain that to you?
They explain that they represent Israel, and it's problematic for them because it causes triggers. They're afraid to lose some of their community members, some of their clients, and they just made a choice not to bring me along because it's too problematic. It will cause them to look Zionist, God forbid, and they don't want to do that. Therefore, they won't have me anymore.
And has your understanding of Zionism, of Judaism, changed over this past year? Are you more struck by how similar or how different you are, you personally?
It completely changed my life. I can say it was a life-changing experience for me. It was the most difficult year of both me and my husband's life. I'm not jealous of anyone who needs to work as a living bridge between Israel and the Jewish community in a very liberal and blue state during a war. Don't recommend it to anyone. It was very hard. I saw and felt a lot of anti-Semitic comments in a very American, polite, yet heart-twitching ways. I decided I want to wear my Star of David for the first time. I never felt the need to do that. But after October 7th, I started wearing it, and I absolutely felt a lot of hatred, very polite hatred, but still. And it really made me realize that we have no other way. We have to have our own countries. No one will ever protect us if it won't be us. So it really was, it really made me understand even more why we need a state. And also made me realize that it's really complicated being a Jewish American, and that sometimes they make choices to go with the flow of hatred rather than stand on who you are and be proud Zionist and Jew. And that's actually a really sad reality.
Do you and your friends and the Tel Aviv University students you work with, do you use the word Zionism, or is it Israelism, is it patriotism? What are the concepts that you live with that guide you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think before October 7th, the word Zionism was like a bit old for Israeli young adults. It felt like something of the past that is just not relevant anymore. We had a lot of conversations that maybe we need a new word to describe what's going on right now. But actually, since October 7th, the word Zionism is back. And we use it a lot, and we try to help our students and each little student worldwide be proud of that aspect of who they are, and be very proudly saying that they're Zionist, and not to be sorry for who you are.
Thank you. Nora, welcome, first of all. You just landed a few hours ago, correct?
Thank you. Yes, I came here straight from the airport, actually.
Well,
so I'm very happy to be here.
So tell us, you were in Israel last year on October 7th? And
No,
so tell us.
I was in school, but I was spending the weekend in New Orleans celebrating a friend's 21st birthday on October 7th. I still had Red Alert downloaded on my phone from when I'd been in Israel. And so I just kind of started getting all the notifications, and I kind of had a similar at first, like, okay, here we go again. Unfortunately, it's not like the most uncommon thing in the world. And just throughout the night, it was just like notification after notification. And I kind of kept checking the news, and I was like waiting for something to pop up, like, when am I going to see what's going on? Because it was clear that, something was happening.
And over the course of the year you were at, tell us a little bit about what you experienced, what you saw.
So I go to Northwestern University that is located outside of Chicago. It's a very, very liberal campus in a very liberal state. So pretty much immediately when I got back to school, like that Monday, I went to my Arabic class that morning. And my Palestinian Arabic teacher kind of was teary-eyed, and she's a poet, and she read us a poem that she had written called Resistance, the Monday right after October 7th. And I was just like completely taken aback. I knew that there would be some kind of pro-Palestinian sentiment on my campus, because we had a very active chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. I was not expecting to see it that soon. And I was just kind of shocked at, I started crying and I had to leave my class. And I came back for the end and she asked if I was okay, and I was like, yeah, I'm fine. Just didn't really want to talk with her about it. So yeah, I just kind of was dreading going to that class for the rest of the quarter, and I eventually I was planning to take it the next quarter, and I stopped taking Arabic at school because of some of the comments and things that I was hearing in class as well, and also I was there to learn Arabic, and we weren't really learning Arabic anymore.
What were you doing instead of learning Arabic? It was conversation, or?
She was teaching us a very colonialized version, I would say, of like Middle Eastern history. I guess if we were learning new words, they were like colonizer or apartheid or things like that. And a lot of the students, and just the climate of the students in the class, a lot of them, I was in a pretty beginner Arabic class. I started taking Arabic on my gap year on Kibunim. But a lot of the students in the class were Arab students that they were pretty fluent in Arabic, but they didn't know how to write or read it very well. And so they were kind of just in the class, I think, to take it for an ECA, is like what many of them told me. So it didn't really seem like many people in the class were that interested in learning Arabic to begin with, but people started making comments about my Judaism, about Hillel, which is where I go to pray at my school, and it became in a very uncomfortable environment.
Did you protest? Were other Jewish students involved? Like, how did you react? What was your response?
Well, so there was one other Jewish student in the class who is involved with Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a very pro-Palestine movement of generally pretty secular Jews on college campuses, that they were also very involved with our encampments later in the year. And so he would come to class wearing a kippah, and he was pretty on board with all of it and was very happy to speak for the Jewish people. And I, like, looking back on it, I really wish that I had, like, spoken up more. I just kind of put up with it. I was like, I'm here to learn, I'm going to do what my professor tells me to do, I'm going to do the assignments.
You were being a student, which is your job, right? But your parents are paying a lot of money for,
Yeah, exactly. I was like, these classes are expensive. I'm gonna, I wake up dreading it, but I'm gonna go to this class and I'm gonna try to learn what I can from the class. I think that this professor is educated and she has things to teach me. And I think it took me a long time to really process what was going on. And looking back on it, I really do wish that I had been able to take more of a stand. But yeah, in the moment, I really just kind of put up with it.
I often tell students that you shouldn't beat yourself up, right? Because the situation was abnormal, right? And you were in many ways reacting in a very normal kind of way. And you can maybe learn something for the future, but it's not helpful to kind of go and say, I should have done this or should have done that. In other classes, did you feel it? Did it really mar your whole year, or was it just one or two classes? How did you experience it overall?
So it was pretty much just that class for that particular quarter. The quarter finished out in December, and then we had our winter break, and we came back, and I started taking my spring classes. And that Arabic class was really the only class that I felt was particularly affected. I mean, I was very affected by everything that was going on. And I have family here in Israel as well, and so just very, very deeply saddened by everything that was happening in Israel. But things didn't really get too bad again until around Pesach, when they set up an encampment on our campus. And
what was that like? Tell us a little bit about that.
So right in the middle of our campus, and they chose to do it right on the week of Pesach as well, which was just an added layer that I'll get to in a minute. But so they set up an encampment with tents, and they were collecting food and water, and students would come and spend the day protesting the university's investment in, quote, Israel. They didn't really specify what exactly it was they were protesting. I tried to ask a few people what it was they were protesting, and they didn't really know. They were just kind of ditching their classes and going to spend time there in Yale. But
did you feel threatened, or did you feel just put up? What was your personal reaction to what was going on?
I tried to avoid it as much as I could. I found a lot of their chants to be very offensive and threatening. People were spray painting on our buildings F Israel, flying huge Palestinian flags, and it's also all of this was not allowed according to the school rules. You're not allowed to post signs, much less put up a huge encampment. Right, it was called Deering Meadow. It's right in the center of our campus, and it's supposed to be this beautiful green space where students can kind of hang out and hang up hammocks and study. And it's right across the street from our Hillel. And so during the week of Pesach, we, the Jewish students, were instructed to access our kosher for Pesach meal plan at Hillel. So we kind of would have to walk right past all of this to go get our meals, basically. And after the first day of that, I had some friends that were harassed by the protesters walking into Hillel, and they were screaming at them ugly Jews and things like that. And so I, at that point, just kind of avoided it. I went around the back way to our Hillel a couple times to get meals, but I mostly was just eating matzo pizza in my dorm room. And then I had a final that was right next to the encampment one day, and it's I'm taking my final, and in the background I can hear them shouting, "We don't want no two-state, bring back 1948," which I thought was shocking. I was taking my global epidemics final, trying to just...
And how did the administration react? What did the administration say? Presumably somebody was complaining?
Yeah, so a lot of people were complaining. We had a big group chat with a lot of like Jewish and Israeli and Zionist students, and our Hillel director was like, just document everything that happens. A lot of the professors were canceling their classes so that students could go to the encampments. There were some professors that were even saying, our classes are meeting at the encampments. If you want to be counted present for class, you have to be there. And so the administration ultimately ended up kind of appeasing the students. They met with the leaders of the encampment and agreed that I think they were going to bring, it was all things that were, to my understanding, it was all things that were already going to happen, but they were just kind of like rebranded as an agreement that they were going to fund to bring 5 Palestinian students to school, that they were going to bring Palestinian professors, which, like, a lot of people were like, this is so great, we don't have any Palestinian professors, and I was like, well, yes, we do, I have one, but I think, like, beside the point. Yeah, they were basically appeased, and they said that we were very unprepared for something like this, that we didn't have the right rules in our guidebooks to be able to enforce them, basically, and so it was left up for a really long time.
And internally, ideologically, what was the conversation at Hillel when you were talking about Israel? Was Zionism a tool for you? Was it, what was going on not when you were responding to anti-Semitism?
So Hillel, I think, was doing a really wonderful job of just trying to be this like open and welcoming space where like Jewish students or any students could come, and they had parents that were sending in donations for just like snacks and like little art supplies and whatever, and it was just supposed to be like a really happy place where we could be around people that like really understood what was happening and understood what we were going through. Our rabbi was doing an amazing job with like counseling and speaking to students. I like spoke with her a few times and like cried in her office, and Hillel was like definitely a very safe space for me like throughout all of this.
Thank you. Aviv, you hear these stories. How do you process what you're hearing about what's going on in America with your experiences after October 7th in Israel?
Look, I think that it's clear to me, and it was clear to me the first time that I was in the United States since the war, that it may have been a different struggle, but the struggle was just as real there as it was here, and it was different, and it was different types of heroes and different types of courage, but it was there nonetheless, and the feeling that you are alone. I was lucky enough to never feel alone from the 9th of October, the day that I landed back in Israel. And I find that very powerful. I can't imagine what it must have felt like to be completely alone on a campus and not quite sure who has your back, who's on your side. It's a different type of courage, for sure.
Tell us a little bit about your trajectory. You came back from Sri Lanka in October?
Yeah, so I'd like to start with the 6th of October for me, because that was a pretty great day. So I was fresh out of the army. I had just finished 3 weeks in Thailand with my tevet from the army. Another 3 weeks with my then girlfriend Roni, learning to surf in Sri Lanka, and life was pretty good. 6th of October, we were taking the train across the countryside on our way to the Maldives. We were spending Simchat Torah in Colombo, and really nothing could be better. And we wake up on the 7th, completely disconnected, and we go to the Chabad, completely disconnected, and at about 12 p.m., sorry, we just finished Shachri, Chabad, and Roni opens up the mechitza and she says, "Come quickly." And I thought somebody fainted or fell, and in came this crying Israeli woman, screaming and yelling and saying, there's a war, and there's terrorists in the south and in the north and in Jerusalem, and they're slaughtering people on the streets. And we hear that, we run back to our hotel, and the initial thought is, is our family okay? What's going on? And we immediately, we've many family members in reserves or active police force or etc. And we make phone calls and we realize, first of all, okay, our family's okay. at least our immediate family. And I open up my phone, it's already about 2 or 3 in Israel. And I'd gotten at 7 a.m. Israel time a message from my mafkatz from Miluim, who I hadn't yet met, but he said, come on over. I texted him, it may take me a while. And we, within 15, 20 minutes of reading a few messages on WhatsApp, we realized that we're starting to look for flights back home, because we said even if it's not like this war was still unclear, but we're not going to travel like this. This isn't a way to have fun. So we were lucky enough to catch a flight quickly back, and throughout that night, I mean, just more and more information is streaming through. Getting, unfortunately, many messages of this friend and that friend and rumors, and it's not clear what's true and what isn't true. I'll never forget, we landed in Dubai, we had a layover, and we're waiting for our bags in the carousel at the carrier, and I'm listening to a voice note from a friend of mine who's still in the army, and he just like lists off 6 names of friends of mine who were killed in Kfar Aza. One of them, Yosef Gedalia, a very close friend of mine from Intifada, and I was just like, what's going on? Later on, of course, we hear also about Ben, that he's missing, Bausi missing. Very unclear. We land, and basically we're off to the races. I slept at home, went off to the army, and like nothing changed. Like there's no Thailand, no Sri Lanka, nothing. We're back working. And it was really surreal. But like I said, once I landed on the 9th, there was something. Once I got my weapon, once I got my vest back, there was something that kind of made me say, okay, we got this. Like I knew that I knew what I was doing, and I didn't feel alone, and I felt like I had my team's support and my country's support. And I found that very inspiring, and I'm listening to you, and I can't imagine what it would feel like not to have that.
I often say when I speak to students that when I tell stories about my kids or about IDF or OX, I'm not doing it to tzahal shame them, because our kids know what it is to go through a building and not know where the explosives might be coming from. But they don't know what it is to stand up alone, and just because you put on a hostage sticker or a label or something to potentially risk social ostracism or an F from a professor. And that really takes a kind of spiritual courage, that they have a different kind of courage. And so I appreciate the fact that, it's too easy to say, oh, this one's doing a better job, that one's doing a better job. I think your generation is all in this together and has done remarkable things. So you were in the Army for how many months? So I was in the Army again for roughly 4 months, a little bit more. And basically throughout the time we were in Miluim, like we of course knew that it would also come to an end. And eventually, like we knew that the Devane would come back from Gaza, they'd switch us, and we'd go out. And me and a few friends, Naya, who served with me also, we started thinking, and we were kind of wondering what's going to be our next step. Like, what are we going to do? We can't just go back to Thailand. We can't just go back to Sri Lanka. Like, it didn't really sit with me. It didn't really sit with other friends. And we were thinking, what's going to be the next way that we give to the country, and that we basically keep on fighting this war. And we had the idea to go down and maybe help down south. Started with like this unclear idea and formed into a garin with Roni, myself, 15 others. We went down to Kibbutz Be'eri, and basically we moved there for 4 months, joining the community. There were 50 people there at the time, and a few came in and a few came out, but more or less 50 of the old stubborn kibbutznikim who weren't going anywhere, and us, 17 of us, and we were picking fruits in the mornings. In the afternoons we were spending time with them and just living the kibbutz life, which was surreal because you're living this
really nice, calm kibbutz life. I didn't experience one siren my whole time in kibbutz Be'eri. But you're also walking through a graveyard. You're walking through ruined houses, and here this person was killed, and here that person was killed. And there was this crazy combination of life and death just every morning on the way to the fields. It was an amazing experience, very, very powerful.
And when you and your friends are fighting or rebuilding Be'eri, are you thinking Zionism? Are you thinking Judaism? Are you thinking Israelism, patriotism? What's the ideological motor?
So, look, I was actually thinking when I read the book, and also the more you guys speak, that the word Zionism isn't really thrown around where I come from. I mean, it's not really spoken about in the sense that I think in a deep way we all kind of feel that we're just living it, and like it seems kind of ridiculous to throw the word around when you can just live it. I think that it for sure, definitely I'll speak for myself, it definitely drives me. I mean, I am his son. So
We'll talk about that in group therapy later.
Had to get that off my chest in case anyone didn't know. So it does drive me. I think the feeling though that just everybody was hurt. We all knew someone. We had to do something. I mean, when you're surrounded by these horrors and you see how people deal with them, it gives you kind of the push to do more and more, and that's why we kind of felt obligated to look for something else to do.
So May, you were saying that when you speak to your students, there's something about the Zionism, you're trying to fill it in. How are you trying to fill it in? Where's the conversation going in Israel?
Does it work? Okay. We try to, first of all, be proud ourselves. Once we're proud, our learners will be proud. We talk about what's going on a lot. We talk about the struggles that Jewish communities worldwide are experiencing, which is not usually on the conversation with Israelis. I think it's really important for students to understand, for Israelis to understand that whatever is going on in Israel immediately affects the Jewish people. And we really we're in this together, for better or worse. And I think from that, the sense of Zionism, just like being rooted in, also many of them are on reserve duty themselves. So we try to be a very steady place for them. We try to reach out, not too much, not to nudge them, but to be there. We have mindfulness workshops. When we try to give them all the tools that they need in order to go back to school afterwards. As you mentioned, it's really hard also to come back, and some of them, part of the time they're on reserve duty, part of the time they're students. Sometimes the difference is a weekend. They're coming back on Thursday from the Miluim, and on Sunday they have courses to attend, they have assignments to do. And these shifts are very hard for them, and we try to be there for them as much as we can, and I think that's just like the best way to do that.
So I'm hearing self-defense, I'm hearing pride, I'm hearing collective defense. I'm also hearing from you, especially the sense of anachnu, what I call the usness, the miracle of us, and the power. I'm wondering, I was trying to push also to two other directions, which are always harder to convince people. So don't feel like you have to agree. One is what President Herzog calls responsibility Zionism. That when we think about some of the challenges that Israel's facing, taking responsibility, trying to rebuild, not just rebuild Be'eri and rebuild the north, but also trying to rebuild our sense of unity in our society, the sense of civility in the society, a sense of mutual respect. To me, that's also kind of part of our Zionist journey. And the second piece, and I'm particularly curious with you, Nora, is this identity piece. That it's not just about they hate us so we push back. not just about we have this challenge and so we have to fight, but somehow when I ask myself deep into the night, what is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of it all? What do I try to be? I use my Zionism as a framework. And I'm curious to hear from each of you to what extent that speaks to you, to what extent that sounds like I'm speaking Greek. Be honest. We'll start with you, Nora.
So I think for the identity piece, my Jewish and Zionist identity, I really try to center it on joy and connectedness and community, kind of as opposed to a pushback to hostility. I think that I was very lucky that I came into my college experience with a strong Jewish, with a pretty strong Jewish identity. I spent a gap year in Israel on Kibbutzim, which was really amazing, and I got to travel, and thank you so much, I'm really sorry. I got to travel all around Israel, and I also got to learn a lot about different diaspora Jewish communities, and kind of the history of Jews in so many different places around the world. And that's just really strengthened my Jewish identity so much, and my Zionist identity as well, as I just learned how important it was to have this Jewish state. And so, for me, the identity piece, it was difficult to kind of socially identify as a Zionist. It's kind of like a dirty word to a lot of people. And I kind of had the thought process of why would I identify as something that we have different definitions of? To me, Zionism is the right of the Jews to have a state in their ethnic homeland. I think if you ask a lot of the people that were protesting or that think of Zionism as this dirty word, they would define it as something like Jewish supremacy. Like Jewish supremacy in the state of Israel, or in the land of Israel, or they probably say the land of Palestine. And so it was difficult. It almost seemed like I would be kind of shutting down any sort of dialogue, because a lot of people, when they hear you're a Zionist, they're like, you're a racist, you're a colonizer, you're not someone that's worth talking to.
So it was kind of something that you would talk about with Hillel kids, but not in polite company.
Yeah, I was I never, personally doubted my Zionist identity, but if I was ever trying to engage in any sort of dialogue, it seemed to almost shut it down from the beginning if I were to say, hey, I'm a Jew and I'm a Zionist.
Jew yes, Zionist no, or both?
Well, I think because of the active presence of Jewish Voice for Peace on my campus, if you could kind of get away with saying, oh, I'm a Jew, but I'm not a Zionist.
As long as you're a clean Jew.
Yeah, you're the okay type of Jew.
Hey?
I feel very, as I said, it was the hardest year of my life, but I also feel very lucky to have experienced what I did. I think it's important for Israelis to feel, maybe it's a weird thing to say, but I do think that it's important for Israelis to feel anti-Semitism, the sense of not belonging. I think for me it was really life-changing experience. I can share that I was a very Zionist, very connected to the people, to the Jewish people before, but it has changed something in me. I got to engage, like you actually, in many conversations that were unbelievable. I had a conversation with an anti-Zionist anarchist who taught Talmud teenagers in a Reform synagogue in Seattle. And I got to have a conversation with him and actually ask him, what makes you anti-Zionist? How does it go with your Talmud teaching? And we actually had a very interesting conversation. We did not agree on anything, but we did finish the conversation with a hug. I also went to the encampments in Washington University with a group of Jewish students from Hillel. It took me a good few days to get over that experience. It was very scary. We were a group of 6 students, and actually one of them was Asian, not Jewish, just a Zionist and very curious, and he went along with us. And he had a Star of David keychain on his backpack. And I don't know if you got to be in the encampments, but there are people who are like running around, making sure that everyone in the encampment are people who are supposed to be in the encampment, and not people from the press who are not supposed to be there. Sounds familiar from history, I know. And he went out to us and he said, that guy following you around, he looks like a Zionist. Do you know him? And they were like, nope, we don't know him. I have no idea what you're talking about. And then we just fled. And from being a group, everyone went to their own way in the encampment because we felt like we can't even stick together. I had conversations with Jewish protesters who were very proudly saying that they're Jewish and they're anti-Zionist. Therefore, they probably know what they're talking about. And I kind of went undercover. I did not say that I'm Jewish or Israeli. It was very hard for me. But it just opened up my eyes to the situation. Seeing anti-Semitic graffiti around our very good, high-class neighborhood. Seeing American people wearing kafia very proudly, like it's the latest fashion item, which it is. And experiencing all that really made my Jewish identity and Zionist identity not having anything to do with laughter or being cynical. Maybe that was the case before, but now I absolutely see things differently, and I feel very fortunate that I can share this perspective with my students nowadays in Hillel, and with you and whoever wants to listen or not, because it is a big deal. We are actually living in a very critical, historic time, and we need to take that moment and make it count, otherwise we didn't do anything.
So, reading the book, I must say there were a few moments where I was looking at the pages and I was like, I've heard this before. I've experienced this before. And while it was the first time I read these letters, these words on a page, I lived through this book in my feeling. I really felt that much of my identity as a Jew, as a person, was through the experiences that you went through, that my mother went through, and it was really the atmosphere in the house of pride in Zionism, of, like you said, proactive Zionism and not reactive Zionism. And these are the stories that I grew up from the two of you, whether it was the proud youth movements that you each were in, or the stories that my grandparents had, whether it was Sabadov gun running for the Irgun, or even Marcel at the young age he was studying in school, and instead of giving in to another beating from the kids who would shut down the lights and fill the socks up with soap and beat the crap out of the Jews.
Your grandfather in Romania.
Yeah, my grandfather in Romania, Marcel. He felt that he had enough, and one day he stuck up his knife sharpener for the pencil, and he fought back and he hit the kids. And these were the stories that we grew up on, and it wasn't how Zeta was beat and how the anti-Semitism was horrible, and Uncle Irv was also beat in the streets of the Bronx. It was the pride they had in being Jewish, the pride you had in being Jewish. And coming to Israel, I mean, that only enhanced it more, obviously, because, like I said, the hostility that I felt, and I think we can agree, Israel feels hostility just a bit. But again, the difference is that it's country against country. It's a terrorist group against. You feel like you have somebody. It's not personal. And I have experienced few times personal anti-Semitism, really minor incidents, and it's a different situation, and it's much harder to react because it's that split second. So for me, again, I was lucky enough to have the surroundings, even back in Canada, that really invoked pride in my Zionism. But I think coming to here, I think that most Israelis will tell you about their uncle, grandfather, brother, sibling who conquered the Chilmon, who conquered the Chilmon Part 2, who did this and that, and it really invokes a proactive Zionism.
Activism,
Yeah,
proactive.
exactly.
Interesting. I want to open up for questions in a minute, so we'll just do a quick round and just think more broadly. I call my generation Generation Hope. What do you call your generation?
I was prepared for this question, so I can answer it. I'll make a difference between Israeli generation and US generation. For me, I think in the US perspective, we're talking about a woke generation. After living in Seattle for 1 year, I can say that, in my opinion, the woke movement is dangerous. It's taking away teens and young adults from our Jewish tribe, and it will be very hard for us to get them back. And I do think it's a dangerous movement, and we don't quite know how to handle it well, so that's the US part. Israeli part, though, I would call us the generation who rose up at the hardest time. I think many of older Israeli men and women, those who really built that country, were surprised of how selfless our generation is, willing to put aside their families, friends, relationships, work, anything for 437 days straight, just to bring back our hostages, to bring back our safety and peace, and they will continue to do so till the very last day. So I'm very proud of our generation, and I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you.
I say your generation is as great as the generations the founding generation, except one difference. You guys have a sense of humor, and Ben Gurion and Begin didn't. So you have something on
That's me.
Nora?
So I think I would also differentiate between the American and Israeli age group of this generation, but it's easy for me to become pessimistic about my generation, even though I know so many individually wonderful people. So I think I settled on generation searching. I think a lot of people are really searching for something to feel like they belong to, and for something to feel like they are a part of, that they can feel like they have some sort of moral connection to. And I think there was something that I read in your book that has really stuck with me. I think it was something that your mom said, that if you're too open-minded, your brains will fall out.
That's Grandma Helen. If you're too open-minded, your brains fall out.
I think my generation could be very open-minded, which is a good thing in small doses, but I think you need to hold on to your true values and morals, and so being very open-minded in your search can be a dangerous thing.
I call a lot of Zionism Pilates, building the core. And somebody tweeted it out today, shifted it, called it Julians, and building a Jewish core.
So, I think if I had to choose the name for this generation, I would say Generation Redemption. But I actually don't think that it's only this generation. I've been asked a few times, how do you feel being part of the generation, the TikTok generation, and I never really connected, because to say that the whole war effort has been on this TikTok generation, I feel is just incorrect. Have me and my friends, have we been on the front lines? Yes. But what I've seen is an effort from everyone, and I just think I wouldn't split up the generations. I would split it into the people who A, believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today. B, not only do they believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today, they also believe that they, wherever they are, whether they're students in the United States or whether they're a Ghanenet in the South, they are part of that tomorrow and they have an active part of making it better. And I would split it into I wouldn't split it into generations, I would split it into believers and non-believers. And within that, do they feel part? Can we move? Because I know people who have, volunteered for Miluim at the age of 60. And unfortunately, I know people at the age of 23 who have ditched Miluim. Cover your ears. And that's why for the question, generation redemption, because there really was something amazing. I feel like many of my friends, I was really proud enough to know people who have, in my mind, brought back the word Gibor from the Tanakh, like really by just running into the fire and running into horrible situations, armed, unarmed, with a vest, without a vest, just to save lives is really unbelievable. But there were people who were 50 who were fighting shoulder to shoulder with them, and still are. So that's how I see it.
Well, thank you, Aviv. Thank you, May. Thank you, Nora. Questions? Yeah. So we have some time for some questions. To me, to them. Yes. Yes, hi.
Quick question.
Wait a second, let me give you one.
Quick question to the person choice. He did mention that roughly half of the protesters were anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist. I'm curious to know why that is. In other words, a protester who is only anti-Zionist, he's political. Someone who's anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist, that's hate. What is the difference between this person? Is it someone who's more intelligent, someone who's less intelligent? How would you define those particular groups?
So thank you for that. One of the shocking things about October 7th was that within minutes, and notice that it happened in New York, and it happened in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it happened in London, and it happened in Toronto, they came out with the same slogans, and they came out with the same banners. It might have just been coordinated. And the speed with which they went into attacking Israel, even when Israel was not yet defending itself, I say shows that it was an attack not on what Israel does. Israel only went into Gaza on October 25th, but what Israel is. And one of the things we also saw that day, we saw it on the Otef in Gaza, we saw it at Harvard, at McGill, in the protests, was the zeal in the eyes and the cries of Itbachal Yehuda, kill the Jews, merged anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And so on October 7th, two of the most ridiculous arguments that have been going on for the last few years in the Jewish world ended. One, which is worse, left-wing anti-Semitism or right-wing anti-Semitism? If it's anti-Semitism, it's unacceptable. If it's bigotry, it's unacceptable. And we have to stop having our left-wing friends only point out right-wing anti-Semitism, and our right-wing friends only point out left-wing anti-Semitism. Similarly, the anguish in the Jewish community of, can we carve out a space where you can be anti-Zionist but not anti-Semitic? I look at my gay friends. I look at my African-American friends. I look at my feminist friends. They don't sit there wondering about the nature of hate and trying to carve out a space for sexists to show that they're really not so bad, or racists to show they're really not so bad. The burden of proof is on them, not on us. And I think we in the Jewish community spend far too much time anguishing about what they're doing. And so I think on October 7th we got a very clear line. And indeed, some people wanted to say, oh, I'm only just anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic. But the burden of proof is on them, and they did very little on October 7th and every day since to distance themselves, if they were truly in an ideological mode of saying, I'm just critical of what Israel does, they've done a very bad job of distancing themselves, and they've gone in with the people who attack with what Israel is. And so that's, there is, I'm sure there have been many interesting sociological analyses of what was going on in the encampments. But fundamentally, one of the things that bonded them was this kind of irrational trending. I think it was very interesting. It became a trend, right? And it became a kind of way of making your stand. Bernard-Henri Lévy says that in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the far left, and we have to be very careful with nuance, not to go with the left and the right, but the far left, the far right, that the far left needed some glue, and they no longer had the Soviet glue, the red glue, and so they took the kafia as the statement, the kafia as the unity point. And so I think those are some of the dynamics that we've seen on campus. And again, I think we just have to have very clear red lines, and part of the argument that I'm trying to make is that it's who was burning American flags and who was waving American flags. So it's an assault on Judaism, on Zionism, on Americanism, on liberalism, and on Western civilization. It lines up. And the more we understand that, and the more we frame it as a broader issue, rather than a short-term issue, and an us issue, but a broader issue, the more effective it will be.
You actually don't know anybody who really distanced himself from the camps because they became anti-Semitic?
I did not see any of that. I'll see what raised you. What actually most broke my heart, and if we had more time I was going to ask you about this, was the lack of empathy on the part of non-combatants. I grew up in a world where we had tough kids in my neighborhood in Queens, Irish Catholic and Italian Catholics, who when they came home from Bishop Molloy High School and learned that Jews killed Jesus, they said some things to us. But had anybody come to attack us, they would have had our back. There were all these anti-Semitic task forces. And when I read the 500 testimonials at Columbia University, and I didn't read of one instance where somebody reported, oh, a non-Jewish friend of mine stepped in and said, hey, what are you doing? There was a young woman at Columbia, 20 years old, who moves into the dorm, and every night people are knocking on the door, knocking on the door, knocking on the door, which is because she put up a mezuzah, which is good old-fashioned anti-Semitism. First of all, lack of empathy on the part of those people, that they can't think how terrified that young woman must have been, and she ultimately moved out of the dorm, so it worked. But what most upset me was the so-called innocent bystanders. And we saw in Amsterdam, and we've seen it at Harvard, we've seen it at Columbia, and we've seen, I'm guessing, at Northwestern. There's no such thing as an innocent bystander. If you're a bystander, you're complicit. And that's an indictment of the generation that simply said, they decided, and I spoke to a Columbia activist who said, look, I get it. They decided they didn't want to be shamed on social media. They didn't want to be bullied. And so they came to campus saying, I'm just going to study Arabic. I'm just going to be a jock. I'm just going to be a cheerleader, whatever. And they didn't want to get involved. But that sense of lack of involvement is toxic to democracy and toxic to Americanism and Zionism. Yes, in the back. Tony, hi.
2 weeks after October 7th. 2 days or weeks after October 7th, I got a call from my sister in New York who said that we're at a critical juncture. Global Jewry is at a critical juncture, and we have to declare whether we're going to Israel or not. And I know that like post-1967, that served as a real accelerant for people to make Aliyah and to move to Israel. I'm curious, for your perspective on whether the events in the last year and a half, the heroism that we've seen in Israel and outside of Israel, the tension, is that serving as an accelerant for your generation, the students to consider making Israel their home?
Nora, do you know of any friends who think of Israel, of Aliyah? Has it changed the conversation in that way?
Yeah, I definitely do have some friends. So most of the friends that I know that are considering Aliyah took gap years in Israel on various programs, and they really experienced firsthand what an amazing place it is to be. But yeah, I do think that it's something that we'll see continue to increase, and it's something that I would consider definitely as well.
And studies show that a gap year not only means you're much more likely to be involved in the Jewish community, but you're much more likely to be both a leader of the Jewish community and ultimately consider Aliyah. So I think that's the critical moment. But you're hearing people are talking about a surge, and that's one of the aspects of the surge. I saw behind you was Sarah, and then Nami.
Hi, this question is mostly aimed towards Nora. First, I want to apologize to you personally because I taught at Northwestern before I came to Israel, and I certainly know some of what you experienced prior to October 7th, which was already brewing on our campus before, before the last year's activities. But I really want to ask, what can we do for you and your peers now? I work with GIL at the Jewish People Policy Institute, and I'm also a professor here in Israel, and I really want to know what we could do to help millennials feel less isolated, but also feel more educated. If we created a course for you on Zionism in Israel, would that be something that you and your peer group would be interested in? If we had mentorship, I guess, between old people like me, the professorial generation and your generation, would that be helpful? Or are you looking more for community with your peers, rather than with previous generations who have not experienced what you've gone through on campus? So I really want to hear what can we do for you to make you feel less isolated, but also feel that there's an outlet for your education that may not be happening on your campus today.
Well, how can we help you? What would work for you?
I think that a lot of what Hillel was doing for community building among students was really helpful. I really liked what you mentioned about mentorship, because I think something that I've gained a lot from reading this book is just how much we have to learn from the Generation Hope. I think that there's so much hope that has been lost to this idea of all of these systemic issues that are so deeply rooted that they can't be fixed. So I think that some sort of mentorship would be really amazing. I've seen my peers be responsive to different speaker series that have been hosted. I was really pleased to see that the MENA Languages program at our school that does not recognize Israel as a state was hosting. They teach Hebrew, but they don't recognize Israel as a state. But
the way they slice things, fascinating.
Yeah.
It takes an academic.
But they hosted a speaker series on collaboration, and so I think that just hearing from lots of people, and I think a lot of people need to be reminded that we have a lot to learn from the older generation, and all of these ideas that people think they're having for the first time, or people have had most of them before.
Thank you. Ani. And then I see some hands here in the front.
Hi, this question is for Aviv. You mentioned before that you, once you had your vest on, you had 16 in your hand, you were shot by a but you felt protected, you felt you know what to do, you felt you were in your zone, you felt that you knew how to move forward, kind of even in a weird kind of way, you felt safe. From that perspective, would you have any advice to your American counterparts, how they could create that same kind of zone for themselves? Same kind of protection, safety, clarity?
I think you said it. I mean, for me, the word is create your own snippet. I mean,
your own step.
Create your own team. Create your own team. Create your own encampment if you need to, and find the people who think like you, because it sounds like there's just utter lunacy, and you're definitely not the only one who thinks that. So I think it's a great question, and I think that we need to work on maybe linking between teenagers or students in the States and students in Milunikim here, because we can learn a lot from you, and I think that you can learn a lot from us, and even that, I mean, a sort of mentorship. So, thank you.
One of the articles I wrote shortly after October 7th was addressed to students, Jewish and non-Jewish, saying, grow a spine. And then shortly thereafter, when at Cornell University Hillel, there was a threat that somebody put, there was a chat and somebody said, oh, we're going to come after the Cornell dining hall, the kosher dining hall, West 120, we know exactly where it is, and we're going to, he said, stab and rape you. What did Cornell Hillel do? They shut it down. And I said, invite the football team and the lacrosse team for free kosher steaks, get some along to spend money on free kosher steaks, and show, first of all, you find out who your friends are, and you find out who your friends aren't, and show that we're not going to give up. And there's a bigger issue. I sat with a group of Columbia students, activists, and I said, when you were kids and a bully punched you in the nose, what did your mother tell you to do? And they all said, tell the teacher. No, 6 of them said tell the teacher. One of them, a Halabi, a Syrian kid, whose father was in the JDL, whose father grew up in Queens, he said, punch him right back. And that's what Mama Troy taught us. We were the nerdiest boys in Queens. But my mother taught us that if somebody hits you, you hit him back. And I think we have to have a deeper conversation, especially in the American Jewish community, about what resilience means and what character building means. We have 2 questions here. I see 2 questions here, so.
Hi. So my question is to the 2 people who were in the United States over the past year. And we were hearing a lot about the encampments. I haven't ever seen one. And I was wondering, how strong are those encampments? Like, are the students there going to chill because there's free food and, you know, it's a good way to blow off their classes? And if you would kind of give some certain repercussions like, you know, losing your year, failing a grade, or even more so, like getting a very strong, like what Aviv said, anti-encampment, it would fall apart. Do you guys have any solutions to how we as Jews could fight back in the United States, who we could affect? Like, because I'm assuming that it might be 10% or 5% ideologues, 95% people who are along for the ride. And how would you guys see, from what you guys experienced, or recommend kind of breaking that apart and, you know, creating kind of like a plan to, you know, stop that if it starts again, not only based off the universities, because we've seen that we can't trust them, and also the police we can't trust. Like, I think that's one of the things that Viv was saying, is that we've experienced through Americans, that sometimes you're stuck because if you fight too hard, you're the one who's going to get arrested. And I completely support you in that you shouldn't, you know, risk your whole future and risk going to prison just because of encampments. But how would you do it in like a constructive and practical way? Thank you.
I'll start. Actually, I have a funny story on the first part of the question. So as I mentioned before, I went to the encampments in Washington University with the Hillel students, and I was terrified. I'm Israeli born and raised, experienced anti-Semitism once in South America, did not think I'm going to face this kind of reality. And after we were splitted, because they noticed that maybe some of us look Zionist, whatever that means, I continued working with one of the students, and I told him, like, I'm shocked, what is this, what year are we, it looks horrible. And he was like, May, stop for a second, look around you. I was like looking around me, and he's like, there is a man Polish station in here. Man who wants to do their manicure, they have a station for that. They have a friendship bracelet station. And he told me, May, these are kids who didn't go to summer camps. They don't have friends. They're looking for a sense of belonging. You mentioned that before. They want to feel part of something. Some of them don't have friends. They don't have a sense of community. This is the first time they get this sense of community, and that's how it looks like. And for me, it helped me to look at things in a bit of a different way, maybe a bit of a humorous way. But also you see that the people who are there, some of them are weirdos. And when you start to look at them as individuals and not as a group, you start to understand that, as you mentioned as well, most of them don't even know what they're protesting for. They just see an encampment, they see fun, they see community, they want it, so they sit with them. So that's one perspective that, for me, it really helped to put things in perspective. With that, I would say that I did feel threatened, and I would not recommend Jewish teens to go there, or Jewish person, or just enlightened people. And I'm going to follow the Hillel at University of Washington agenda, which is don't give them what they want. They want you to get angry, they want you to tear their posters, they want you to act. By not acting, by avoiding and continuing your daily campus life, that's just like the best revenge that we can do. I agree with you that unfortunately we can't trust the universities to do what they need to do, but we can still look at ourselves and put our heads up and walk tall and be proud of being Jewish. That's the best thing that we can do. That's what makes them angry the most. Yeah.
There are 1,400 universities in the United States. 340 had some form of encampments or protests. And for example, at Columbia, there are 30,000 students enrolled, and barely 500, 600 were involved. So there was a kind of megaphone effect. We have a question here, and then 2 more questions in the middle.
Obviously, and Europe, do you think the biggest challenge is more about the next generation and how they can become leaders and ensure the continuity of their community in their country, or the image vis-a-vis the outside, the asbara, the regular asbara outside of the community? What do you think is the most challenging for the communities?
If you had asked me that 2 years ago, I was always somebody who was very clear about the fact that we spend far too much time focused on anti-Semitism, and we have to spend far more time talking about continuity, building ourselves up, having an identity conversation. Unfortunately, since October 7th, the last 14 months, we've seen such viciousness, such intensity, that we kind of have to do both. We have no choice. We can't ignore it. When the Free Press shows that the number of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada jumped by 760%, we have to push back. But one of the things I always tell students is push back just enough so that you don't feel like a pushover. But don't make that the overwhelming mission. If we're just building, as I said before, anti-Semitism, we fail. Jean-Paul Sartre, after the Shoah, said, the anti-Semite makes the Jew. And I argue the Jew makes the Jew. And so fundamentally, at the end of the day, we have to figure out a vision that works in Canada, in the United States, in the UK, that's positive, that's inspiring, that includes these elements of fighting back, but are far more about a positive vision, or else we're lost. I see Greer and Tamara, and then Stephen will finish. In the middle. All right, tomorrow then Greer. No, good, let's go.
Are you? No. It's common in many places for people to become disillusioned with the leaders of movements or philosophies or ideologies. Do you think that amongst the American students who are quite proud to be Jewish, but become anti-Zionist, that they are disillusioned with Israel and Zionism because of our leadership and the disharmony that's been sown here? All the unity that we talk about is just lip service. It's not happening.
So how much of what's going on in the camp among the Jews, the Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now, is a response to Netanyahu, to the judicial reform, to the division, let's say, before October 6th, or before October 7th, which we're now seeing again? How much of it is about what Israel, it goes to the mind, Israel is, or what Israel does? Is it about the headlines in the news, or is it more sort of a deeper thing?
And so from my experience, speaking with a lot of these Jewish Voice for Peace, most of them are very secular and didn't have a very Jewish upbringing at all. A lot of it comes from their parents, from what I can tell. I had a friend that had a really just kind of like troubling encounter with one of these students. It was like it was just like kind of a harmless conversation about like where they were from, and it came up that he was from New York City but had never attended a B'nai Mitzvah, and she was like, how are you from New York City? You've never attended a B'nai Mitzvah, like most people that aren't even Jewish have. And he said, my parents didn't want me associating with those types of people. And this is someone that says that he's an anti-Zionist Jew. And so I think that a lot of them will tell you that it's disillusionment with the Israeli government, and like it's not what Israel is, it's what Israel does. But I think that it is something deeper that most of them are very disconnected from their Jewish faith to begin with.
I think a lot of it also has to do with the Palestinian issue. I think at the end of the day, the occupation and the fact that we're cast as the oppressors in a world where you're either oppressor or oppressed, and they're the oppressed and we're the oppressors, transcends. We had a 1.5-year experiment of Lapid and Bennett and Arabs in the coalition, and from my perspective, it didn't make a difference in what I saw in the growing academic intifada before October 7th. So I think it has much more to do with the Palestinian issue, is because then it's about we're against social justice, we're on the side of the oppressor, and I think that's what was really sort of the engine behind the founding both of If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace. Tomorrow.
Hi. First of all, thank you to all of you. It's super interesting. Nora, I'm wondering, I guess I'm asking as a parent, but also just as someone who naturally would feel protective to someone like you who is in this kind of situation. What were your parents doing? What was the reaction of your parents and the parents of your friends, your Jewish friends, to what was going on? That's my first question. And secondly, was there any kind of, well, maybe it's a three-part question, was there any attempt to engage with like to sort of unite as a parent group and engage together and to sort of have some kind of, group strength, brain thinking ideas, brainstorming of what to do and engaging perhaps with the administration? And also I'm wondering, what was Hillel doing in terms of engaging with the administration? Were they engaging with the president and et cetera, and the administrative staff of the university?
Both parents.
So my parents were very supportive of me. They were like checking in all the time. My dad, he's a Southern man to his core. He was like, if you ever feel threatened, I'm coming up there with my gun. He's like, I have friends that'll come with me. But seriously, he was like, if you feel like you are feeling threatened, we're bringing you home. And so they were checking in on me about that. I said, I don't want to feel like I'm quitting. I want to stay here and finish out. But I actually did end up taking this past fall quarter off from school, and my parents were very supportive of that as well. I did not spend the fall semester on, we do quarter system, but it was basically this semester. So I'm going back to school in January, but I haven't been all fall. And my parents were very supportive of that and just supporting my mental health. And so that was.
Parents try to get together now?
The parents trying to get together and mobilize.
So there is a parent-run coalition. It's like called the Coalition Against Anti-Semitism at Northwestern, and they are very involved with our administration in fighting anti-Semitism on campus. And they've done a lot of great work. They have some legal representation as well. I'm in a WhatsApp group chat that has a lot of parents and students they're doing a lot of great work. And from what I can tell, it's a much improved situation on campus right now to the one that I left.
I think it has to be framed as a consumer rights issue, and there has to be a fight against educational malpractice.
Yeah.
There's medical malpractice, there's legal malpractice, and there's educational malpractice. When you hijack the holy podium and turn it into your political platform, you've actually violated the core relationship with your students. And I think we have to look more systemically at what's going on campus. We have to ask about what's happening with professors, what's happening with students, what's happening with parents, what's happening with alumni, what's happening with with administrators and think of where the pressure points, and again, always doing it with nuance, not thinking that every university campus is on fire, but doing it in a way that's appropriate, but also harnesses the power that we have. We have time for one final question from Steve, and then we'll finish.
I wanted to ask, it seems to me that there was a perfect storm of two things that happened in North America after October 7th.
Take a mic.
It seemed that there was a perfect storm of two things that happened simultaneously, certainly in North America, probably other parts of the world. One is this woke culture, where the oppressor is always, we are against him and we're in favor of the oppressed. Traditional anti-Semitic feelings in America, which already existed, and then anti-Israel feelings. At the same time, you had a very well-constructed and seemingly well-funded attempt by outsiders, i.e. Qataris and others around the world, who provided tents and provided the funding for curricula in campuses throughout North America. And I have a lot of questions about this, but if I can just ask one question, is what is the strategy for dealing with these two sources of different types of threats that we have to Jews, to anti-Semitism, to Israel?
Unfortunately, there is no strategy. There's a lot of anger and a lot of angst. Part of the problem is that a lot of the academic, what I call the academic intifada, got caught in the political dynamics of Trump, Biden, and Trump, Harris. And if you looked, for example, at one of the things that happened at Harvard when Claudine Gay was removed as president of Harvard, from my hearing and my looking and speaking to many alumni, most blue Americans, most upper middle class blue Americans, non-Jews, who are the core constituents of Harvard, of Yale, of Rutgers, of UCLA, they basically looked at it as Fox News won. They looked at it as a victory for the conservatives. And as long as that dynamic is seen as part of this broader dynamic I was talking about of left, right, all or nothing, it'll be very difficult to have real change in the universities. Now, we also have to be careful again about that word "the." So we talk about the universities. Assessments of the campus. Washington Monthly did an assessment that showed that of the 340 encampments, most of them tend to be more on the elite campuses, more on the northeastern campus. And of course, those are the places where Jews congregate and where Jews worship and where Jews invest in it. And there was some pushback by donors, but as Shai Davidovich, who was an activist in Columbia, said, Columbia, Harvard, they're too big to fail. They can afford to lose Bill Ackman and this one and that one, because and especially if they haven't lost their core base. So my approach is on three levels. One is most important is I think we have to figure out how do we support students, how do we empower students, how do we make sure that the core educational relationship is preserved. And again, with nuance, because there are many, many places, there are many, many classrooms at Harvard, at Yale, at Columbia, where that still goes on. So to not come with a big broad brush, but to call out those people using phrases like education malpractice, where that's happening, and to help students push back again, first in a constructive way, saying what's going on, and then ultimately to escalate. That's one approach. Second, I learned from the Harmony Club in Manhattan and the Hillcrest Country Club in Los Angeles. When Jews were banned from the fancy New York clubs, like the Knickerbocker Club, they built a bigger, better one called the Harmony Club. When Jews were banned from LA country clubs, they built the Hillcrest Country Club, and shortly thereafter found oil on that site, and so every country club member got a stake of oil. And so one of the things we have to be thinking about is how do we improve our universities here? So that when you take a quarter off, you go, oh, maybe I'll come to Reichman, maybe I'll come to University. And while the universities here are excellent, our social science and humanities don't yet reach the level of the Technion or the Weizmann Institute. And so we have to work on that. I think also within particular universities, you're never going to, you can try to launch a new university like Barry Weiss is doing with University of Austin, but that's a multi-year project and costs billions. You can, however, create a new center with $10 million in 2, 3, 4, 5 centers on different campuses, which are dedicated not to left, not to right, but to traditional learning, to great books, to lowercase l liberal ideas, to civics, to those kind of things, and create an alternative to that woke space. So I think we actually need to think more creatively and constructively, again with nuance, about where are the pressure points, how can we both push back broadly, but also try to rebuild new opportunities for our students. And with that, I think we will liberate you.
Okay, you mentioned a while ago that Menachem Begin had no sense of humor. I'm gonna check the archive tomorrow and find his Menachem Begin's joke book or something. I want to thank Aviv and May and Nora very, very much for joining us, and most of all, Bill Troy. And I encourage you, buy the book, it's on sale outside, and also Pomerat's in town and on online as well. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our partners, the JPPI, and for Yiddish Stone for honouring us with his presence. Thank you everyone. Good night.